Good morning, grade 12. Today we're going to be doing another literature lesson. We are dealing with the genre short stories. Today we are going to be talking about next door. Okay, I trust that you've read the story because it is a very interesting story. So the story's name is Next Door. Now, it names the setting. What does that mean? That everything that happens in the story happens next door. Next door to who? Next door to Paul and his family. It suggests that next door and its events can adversely affect lives at home too. Now, in the story, for you to understand this, let me first tell you the story. So Paul his parents want to go and see a movie, but the movie's not appropriate for a child his age. Okay, so his mom is like, oh, my baby, I don't want you to be exposed to this. And he's like, so what is this all about? And it's a girl who makes bad choices. It's not a euphemism. I don't know for what kind of bad choices, but yes. So his dad says, listen, if it's going to make you feel better as his mother, let the child come with us to the movies. And she goes like, no, he can't see the movie. So she locks all the doors and she writes down phone numbers and she does this whole lot of things to make sure that her baby is now going to be safe and protected. Right. Off to the movies the parents go. Now, Paul, 8 years old, home alone. They live in a semi-detached house. What does that mean? It's like attached by a thin wall. So Paul can hear everything that's happening next door. Okay. Paul then starts to hear a fight. And Paul's thinking, I can't deal with this. But he had things that he was planning to do, like playing with his telescope and looking at sugar and hair through the telescope. And he becomes distracted by this fight next door. And while all this is going on, there's a guy called All Night Sam on the radio. And in essence, he decides he's going to phone All Night Sam and say, let's play a dedication, from Mr. Hager to Mrs. Hager to get the two people back together. But it doesn't turn out that way. I'm going to stop there. Setting. It is in the USA, in a semi-detached house in the 1950s. Remember the time period. The dividing wall is paper thin, so you can hear everything. Paul is home alone and he hears the neighbors fighting. Okay, that in the 1950s, how do we know that? There are certain things that happen in the drama, like the radio and All Night Sam and the phone that you must still dial. And so you need to go and look for those particular images that are indicative of the time period in terms of the year that it happens in, right? Plot. The Leonards are going to see a movie. That's not unsuitable, remember? The girl makes bad choices. Paul is home alone, and he hears a violent argument next door. Now, Paul's parents, or more particularly, Paul's mom, decides, Paul is a baby, and he can't go and see this adult movie because she wants to protect him, from the horrors of the world. What happens then? He's home alone, supposedly safe, and he hears a violent argument next door. Okay? And now suddenly, next door is not so far away, because next door is now impacting directly on what is happening to the 8-year-old boy who is supposed to be home alone for safety reasons. Okay? He tries to stop the fight, and he calls the radio station, and it makes matters worse. I'm going to tell you how it makes matters worse. Climax, he hears 3 shots fired, and he thinks, oh no, I've just gotten somebody killed. And then, conclusion, some lady comes running out from the house next door. She tries to bribe Paul. And she says, she takes stuff out of her bag and she gives it, and she says, you don't say anything. And when the police arrive, they find Mr. Hager's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. And now we're beginning to realize, okay, so what Paul heard was not Mr. and Mrs. Hager. Paul heard Mr. Hager and his mistress fighting. Then, because, remember, he's an innocent boy, like the girls in the story, like the children, Lil and Alf and Kezia, we are talking about the concept of innocence lost. Paul tries to save the marriage of his neighbors, and he calls All Night Sam. And then the dedication goes out, and it says, from Mrs. Hager to Mr. Hager, and, I love you, and let's, make this work. And Charlotte, and murder a year, I put it in italics because we know that nobody died. Charlotte comes flying out of the house. And Paul comes out of his house at the same time. And she tries to bribe him. And Paul's like, Oh, wow, he has no idea. He's 8. He doesn't know what happened. He doesn't know about mistresses and people cheating and what. And at the same time, this is happening. She's running out and the police come. Eventually, the real Mrs. Hager pitches up. And now she thinks that the dedication that was sent out was sent from her husband to her, which is why Charlotte, the murderer, fired the 3 shots. Because, imagine now, girlfriend and boyfriend, Mr. Hager's cheating on his wife, and him and Charlotte are having a fat old argument, and this dedication comes through where Mr. Hager says to Mrs. Hager, I love you, let's make everything work. And Charlotte is there, already very crazy in this argument, and she fires 3 shots. And Paul, who is at home, supposedly safe. Remember now, his parents wanted to protect him from the girl in the movie who made bad choices, is privy to this entire situation. Now I ask you, where is poor Paul's innocence now? By the way, Paul does succeed in getting the Hagers back together, even though it didn't go as he planned. Who are the characters in our story? Please remember, I'm going to say this every time. A short story is made up of elements. So we've already done the title and we've done the setting. Now we are going to do the characters. And so these are the people in the story. And what they do drives our plot. Okay, so our characters need to do something in order for the story to develop. And our story is basically just our plot developing. So we have Paul, Mrs. Leonard, Mr. Leonard. Those are his parents. Then we've got Mr. Hager and Mrs. Hager, the neighbors, and Charlotte. Charlotte is the one who fires the 3 shots and who's having an affair with Mr. Hager. Characterization. Remember what I said? What people do develops the plot. So characterization, let's start with Paul's mom. So Paul's mom treats him as though he is a baby. And she doesn't feel the movie is age appropriate. So now in Paul's mind, because look, it works like this with parenting and moms and dads. You want your child to be a particular way, so you treat them in a particular way. So Paul's dad wants him to be more grown up, and Paul's dad says to her, don't call him a baby, but she calls him a baby, and she doesn't want him to see the movie. But what she does is she leaves him home alone, and she writes down, here, list of emergency numbers, locks the doors and windows. So she puts everything into place to make sure that Paul is going to be safe. The father's like, you know what, nothing will happen if he watches the movie. And if it's going to make you feel better, then take the child with us. Let's just take Paul with us. And that was now where the mother's like, no, you can't see the movie, and she does all this stuff. So we know that Paul's father wants him to grow up now. He's 8 years old. Let's be a little bit of a man. And the mom is like, oh, my baby. You know, and Paul's stuck in the middle, doesn't know which way to go. But now clearly next door is going to decide for that. Paul. What does this mean? Premature development. Remember Paul's mother still called him, oh, my baby. And now Paul hears a fight. And you know what's so sad? I shame, man. It's actually sweet. The innocence that Paul has, when he makes that call to All Night Sam, he is assuming that Mr. and Mrs. Hager are fighting. Like, in his mind, it must be because they married. Who else can it be? Can you imagine his shock when they speak of Charlotte in the story? They call her, she looks like an unmade bed. So you can just imagine like that untidiness and Charlotte. And remember, she's cheating, so she has this wildness about her. And Paul phones and wants to save a marriage, and here this woman comes running out. Innocence shattered, lost completely. Premature development occurs because Shayman, he has a soft, sleepy, radiant sweetness, you know, like his mommy. And he cares about others, and so much so that he feels that he has to stop the fight next door. And look where that leads to. And he has to cope with a situation that's beyond his years. And the situation is obviously the cheating woman running out and him hearing the 3 shots and thinking, oh, I've just killed someone. And you know what happens when he does think that, he goes and he hides on his blankets and covers his head because he wants to be safe, he wants to hide, he wants to, I can't deal with what's happened. 8 years old. And realizing people are dying because he's thinking this, I don't even know this lady, what have I done, what have I done? And his mother and his father, meanwhile, at the movies, thinking, doors are locked, windows are locked, phone numbers are there, Paul's probably safe, looking at his, through his microscope. Meanwhile, the lad is forced into premature development. The themes, what are the themes? So themes are basically just the universal messages. So the difference between adults and children's perceptions. So how did Paul see what was happening next door? He saw it as an opportunity to make peace. A husband and a wife are fighting, and all he's thinking is, how can I make this better? And he hears All Night Sam on the radio, and he thinks, oh, this is a plan. And that childhood innocence, so children have this need or tend to want to make it better. You know, they are optimistic. They are eternally optimistic until that innocence is taken from them. So his perception is, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Haga are having a fight. I'm going to phone All Night Sam, because All Night Sam seems to be able to reach a lot of people. Because remember, he's now been listening to the radio, and he's been hearing what All Night Sam is saying, and he's thinking, here's my ticket. I'm going to save the marriage now. I'm going to make sure that they're okay. I'm going to phone All Night Sam. And he does that, okay? Because that is his perception. The adult's perception of this entire thing is different. Now, when I speak about this, I'm not speaking about one particular instance. Paul's perception of the fight, his parents' perception in terms of leaving him home alone. The mother thinking, baby, I can't do this. The dad saying, no, man, he's a big boy. He needs to grow up. Mr. Haga doing his own thing on the other side and cheating with Charlotte in his house. In his house. Where's Mrs. Haga in all of this? Right, coming of age. You know what coming of age is? Coming of age means, in general, it means when you reach adulthood. Okay? So you're now 21, for example, or 18, you reach adulthood. Shaman, Paul, coming of age, because the man next to him was cheating on his wife. And Paul was privy to this entire thing with gunshots and all. Coming of age, stripped of innocence. There we go, innocence lost. I forgot that was written there. And then the guilt of parents. So this year, guilt of parents. Why? Because at some point his mother was like, I can't leave my child alone, but I really want to see this movie. Now, am I going to make myself feel better? So I'm going to lock all the doors and the windows, and I'm going to leave all the emergency numbers. And remember, his father says, leave the child, he knows how to dial. And that's how we know it was the 1950s, because really, nowadays it's cell phones and we press the buttons, we don't dial. I'm sure you don't even know how to dial a zero on a... Anyway, meanwhile, the guilt of the parents. So the mother now says, here's all the numbers and all overprotective and whatever. And, you know, off they go to the movies. So they're lovely, having a beautiful time at the movies, unaware of what's happening to poor Paul. Very, very sad. Right, now, this irony, why did I mention this? Because it's important in this story. In this story, Paul's mother wants to protect him from violence, swearing, sex, and frightening things. And she says the movie is not age appropriate, which means that there are things in there that an 8-year-old should not be privy to. So she decides to leave him at home. The irony lies in the fact that Paul was exposed to the very things that his mother wanted to protect him from. And the thing about it is, if he had gone to the movies with his parents, they would have been there to sort of mitigate the effects of what was coming through. But because he was home alone, this was unfiltered. So, violence, shots are fired, swearing, the couple are fighting, infidelity, and he's discovering, oh, Mr. Haga has a girlfriend, oh my word. So, can you imagine? Sex and infidelity at his age. I'm sure the movie wasn't that bad. Frightening rather. He is afraid because he thinks, oh, I'm the reason that they shot Mr. Haga now. And that's ironic because shame, his mother tried to protect him from all that, and here Paul, first-hand experience, no parents to mitigate. Very, very, very funny actually. But also ironic, right? Well, more importantly, ironic. So, that's the end of that, but I'd like to just summarize for you. So, in this story, little Paul is going to come of age, okay? And that is going to happen through this very bad, traumatic experience. This happens for different people at different times. And one of the messages of the story is that we cannot protect and prevent our kids from growing up, okay? that's the one thing. The other thing, sometimes next door is not as far away as we think it is, because Paul's parents assumed that he would be safe in his house. They took every precaution to make sure that he would be safe in his house. Everything that happened next door. Paul was not privy to what was happening, but he was almost a part of it because he could hear everything. And whatever was going on next door directly impacted Paul's life at home. And in our lives, often what happens next door or outside of our homes and our lives has a direct impact on what happens to us. So our parents need to prepare us for that. Paul's parents needed to prepare him for things that could have happened other than locking windows, doors, and writing down phone numbers, because they wanted to keep him safe. Grade 12, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I trust that you've learned a few things from the elements of the short stories and the content of the slides. Thank you so much.